You're listening to Puma Podcast.
I received a call from the President, Rodrigo Roa Duterte, at approximately 5 a.m., instructing me to meet him at his residence in Doña Luisa, Davao City. I was already acquainted with the mayor, having served as the station commander in one of the police stations in Davao City during his tenure.
That's retired Police Colonel Reina Garma, recounting a conversation she had with President Duterte in 2016, a month before his inauguration.
During our meeting, he requested that I will locate a PNP officer or operative who is a member of the Iglesia ni Cristo, indicating that he needed someone capable of implementing the war on drugs on a national level, replicating the Davao model.
Garma's distress was palpable as she joined a slew of law enforcers directly implicating Duterte for the killings perpetrated in the name of his drug war.
The Davao model referred to the system involving payment and reward. The Davao model involves three levels of payment of reward. First is the reward if the suspect is killed. Second is the funding of planned operations. And the third is the refund of operational expenses.
For months, chilling details about the drug war and how it was conducted have been laid bare by insiders at hearings held by a mega panel of lawmakers. Top enforcers outlined a system of quotas and rewards and admitted the hypocrisy that plagued the campaign from the start. In this episode, I speak to a drug war lawyer who assists the International Criminal Court and has joined the hearings as a resource person. She weighs in on how the hearings are being conducted and what they might mean for the ICC's probe.
Hopefully, soon enough, we'll hear about how the killings on the ground, massively, the one-time, big-time operations, were fashioned, envisioned. And we want to close the gap from the Duterte, that it was him who ordered it directly or indirectly, and then it trickled to through the hierarchy, whether the hierarchy be the PNP hierarchy, and ito na yung naging revelation, or private personalities. And itong private personalities, dito na pumapasok na yung pogo, yung drug trade itself. Kaya sabi nga namin, grabe yung criminal syndicate. Parang it's both public and private actors. And you had the Dutertes on top.
I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka.
I am Kristina Conti. I am the Secretary General of the National Union of People's Lawyers, National Capital Region Chapter, and one of the lawyers for the victims of the war on drugs.
Attorney Conti is also assistant to counsel at the ICC.
We are following the probe, and in fact, we are part of it. We have been called, both me and Nery Colmenares, we have been called as resource speakers. First, in the House Committee on Human Rights probe, and then later on when it was put together with the three other committees, it became the Quadcom. So I was able to sit in two sessions of the Quadcom already. That is specifically when they focused on EJ case.
I think one of the things this probe is under scrutiny for is the fact that there are a lot of former, I guess we can say former now, Duterte allies conducting this probe. People who would have refused to investigate him just 4 years earlier, investigate the drug war. What's it like being in the room with them? What's the tenor? What's the atmosphere?
Yeah, actually, now that you really point that out, there are many layers that are revelatory to us. So first, if you look at the personalities involved and even the institution involved, I mean, years ago, it would have been impossible to talk about extrajudicial killings in the House of Representatives, and to have these people talk and confront this issue, actually all these issues altogether. And secondly, for this institution and for these people to accept victims of the war on drugs. For us, one of the major highlights would have been the session in July when the Human Rights Committee allowed victims to testify in one whole session. So kami lang yung nagsalita nung panahon na yun at nagkwento ng nagkwento. So for this institution and the people to be talking about something that could actually have an effect on them as well is refreshing to some extent. Although, and this is my caveat, when we were invited to join this house hearings, we actually weighed our remedies and options because for many, and reasonably so, they believe that this would have an impact on the ongoing investigation of the International Criminal Court and other courts, in fact, domestic courts. When we started the probe, we were, I think, months away from the promulgation of judgment in one of our cases in Caloocan for homicide of an extrajudicial killing in September 2016. So medyo nakakatakot. But when we weighed our options, we said that engaging in this probe is for us more of evidence gathering and sort of a discovery procedure more than anything. It is not actually an investigation which will technically lead to prosecution. That's the thing. So, for us, although we really think this is a political exercise, maski kami, nakikita namin na ang daming politika involved, we just choose to overlook it and see the benefits for us of how much information we're getting, how many people are coming forward, and for us, very important ito, how many perpetrators are willing to speak up and talk about their own participation in the killings. These are very heinous crimes, and very rarely would you have them come forward as, I would say, as easily as we have seen. Of course, there's a lot behind the scenes, pero as you can see, parang bigla na lang may susulpot na witness, and then next hearing, may witness na naman. I think it really helps as a political signal for others, most especially, that it's now okay to talk about these things. And this is key. And that those who are the masterminds might not likely get away with it. So we're looking at a possible invitation. Hindi pala at invitation. The invitation is standing, but a possible attendance of Rodrigo Duterte himself. So let's look out for that.
And I want to circle back to something you said just now. Is you mentioned that your approach to this probe is more of like an evidence gathering approach. Can you tell me a bit more what you mean by that? Do you mean for evidence gathering for your local cases and for the ICC case, which you're assisting with?
Yes, actually, for everything. Yeah. When we started assisting the victims of the war on drug, it was more of documentation, just to make sense of what was happening. The cases are, I would say, secondary. Prosecution is secondary because for many, the mere fact that you are recognized as a victim of a human rights violation is cathartic already.
One of their original goals was to push forward a law similar to one passed for victims of martial law abuse. It formally recognized some 11,000 victims of the dictatorship and set aside 10 billion pesos of ill-gotten wealth retrieved from the Marcoses to compensate them.
But then sobering because this might not have happened if we had a different administration. And another point, if this administration chooses to side with the Dutertes once again. It's as easy as that. With the snap of a finger, pwede nilang balik na rin lahat to. And so the evidence gathering that we're doing is for recognition, one, and two, well, for prosecution. But I would have to admit this, even with the personalities coming forward, we have been reviewing our cases, but we have been unable to build any more cases to file in court. So the victims that we work with Rise Up for Life and for Rights, are those in the urban poor communities, the quote-unquote traditional victims of the war on drugs. Yung mga nanlaban, yung mahirap, yung walang alam, yung mga na drug list. The victims that have been disclosed in this investigation are those actually who are either in the mid-level organization itself, kumbaga, they turn against each other, and those who are either identified as drug lords or threats to the either yung extrajudicial killing system or to the drug trade. which, as we are now discovering, is probably cornered by the Dutertes in Davao, and a crucial point for reflection, because as it appears, we had one family saying that they will go after the drug addicts, but it turns out that they were in charge of the drug trade itself.
We talk more about why this matters to the ICC after a quick break.
We haven't vetted directly the witnesses who have come forward. We were just as surprised as the others who were in the panel when several of them came forward. So it was intense for them to be retelling and narrating their stories. And for many, parang vicariously, it was confirmation of what we thought. This is how it goes. You just call someone and say, "Hi, I have the money, and here's the person that you're supposed to kill." Parang gano'n naman yung theory eh. So, to put flesh into chismis was important for us because for a long time we haven't heard from any quote-unquote insider witness. And I'm going to use ICC terms. From an insider witness, talk about how they perpetrated these crimes. An insider witness is someone who can talk about the house. Paano ginawa, sinong nag-utos, paano inutos. So, someone from within the hierarchy of the perpetrating unit. And their testimony in the ICC has been very critical in some cases where it is impossible to obtain information or evidence because of state support. And precisely in these cases of extrajudicial killings, where state participation is implied, it necessarily means that no one will be held to account, no one will be investigated. And if ever there is an investigation, that it will be shoddy, it will be misleading. That's why, well, hopefully we will have more. And we want to close the gap of knowledge because our theory is that Duterte ordered all these killings and then the killings happened on the ground. And the killings, I'm talking about those in urban poor areas, yung mga kliyente natin sa Rise Up. But now we've been hearing about killings inside the jail, sa Bucor, sa Dapicol. We've heard about a killing of a PIDEA agent.
You highlighted a lot of testimony about insiders who were also victimized or killed. So within the PIDEA, within the ranks of the PNP, why is that particular detail, those details about insiders who were killed, why is that standing out to you? What will that add to the case being prosecuted against the drug war?
It will strengthen the role of Duterte. Because from our point of view, how we trace him to the killings is through his public statements.
Mhm.
And to some extent, that's good enough for the ICC. But on another level, the Office of the Prosecutor has to look at all modes of participation or responsibility. And one such mode of responsibility, if he was a principal by inducement, meaning he himself ordered the killings directly. And that is the running theory for many of us.
Yeah.
But what we lack in terms of evidence, we cannot establish that as victims because all we know is that the men and some women ended up dead on the streets. The highest we could go as to perpetrators would be maybe chief of police or team leader of the operation. But none of the documents will point to Duterte as part of the operation. And so this is the irony that we see, that for those on the ground, they can only physically connect those who were physically present to the scene and therefore to the killing. And that is how the courts are limited, because you need someone to say explicitly how another person was involved who was not there. And if Duterte was not present in all of these killings, how was he involved? We know that he made rewards. We know that he encouraged the killings. But how exactly did he foster the environment? And one is the quota and the reward system, which are required of the both the PNP and the private personalities involved, the vigilante killers, who sometimes turn out to be the police themselves. So we didn't know about their system. And only the killers can speak about the killings. But for the ICC, it's another thing altogether because it's a different arena. And there would be different investigators. There would be another layer of vetting, qualification, and authentication of his testimony. And it would be up to the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC to look into that. So right now, what I can say is that they have not yet probed this part of the investigation. These are revelations, some of which the ICC already knows, but most of which it doesn't yet. So I think it's still making sense of what's happening. And soon enough, I think officially they would receive requests to cooperate with the ICC investigators too.
Regardless of this House probe, the ICC would want to talk to these same whistleblowers or insiders, as you call them. Are you able to tell us if any of those conversations have already happened?
The ICC is hampered by the inability to enter the country officially. Although President Marcos himself said that they can come in their personal capacity, maybe say that they're coming to Cebu, Boracay, and anything else for personal purposes. Of course, it's a different thing altogether if there was official cooperation, because that would mean they could avail of an office. They could go to the offices. They could peruse the records. They could obtain copies of the records. It is difficult if the government of the Philippines is doing nothing. Essentially, that's what they said. They will not cooperate, but they will also not do anything. So I think that is one critical issue, their inability to come here physically. In other cases, actually, especially in Africa, the ICC has been able to put up field offices for collection of evidence and also for reaching out to the victims. So here in the Philippines, we were looking at that initially, but it might be impossible given the circumstances. Hopefully, with the change of mind, with the change of politics, and let's see how 2025 will change it. We could see more opportunities for official and formal relations with the ICC. For us, there has been a semblance of professionalism in this inquiry. I know that there is also a taint of politics. But for us, as long as we get information and hopefully justice in the long run, this is a good exercise to be involved in. Evidence gathering and discovery procedures. Ito yung, judicially, it is how you get more information. We are involved in this in the long run.
You made this connection between this House probe and transitional justice. I think that concept might not be very familiar to some listeners. So, can you talk a bit more about that? One, the importance of that, and two, how the House probe might be inching us closer towards that?
Yeah, so you're right. After great periods of conflict or some big concern, some national issue, there comes a time of quote unquote peace. And that is where transitional justice mechanisms usually kick in. And we say transitional, you're coming from a place of conflict to a place of peace. And justice recognizes, as you said, that there have been grave human rights violations during the time of conflict, of intense confrontation, so to speak. So recognition is a first step and a very critical step. But then, of course, you can run through the whole gamut of accountability mechanisms, which would involve investigation, prosecution, and then reparations. For many, it is not a linear thing. It is not a linear experience. And you can jump from, as what has happened in the Marcos atrocities concern, you have jumped from actually a little bit of recognition. In the Philippines, it wasn't even recognized that these were state perpetrated salvages and human rights violations. And then we jumped to reparations with the Swift case in the US. So it could take a long while. But for the victims of the war on drugs, they are healing in many ways. And one example has been the physical repository of the remains of the dead. We're slowly coming to some sort of order. There is a group that deals with exhumation and cremation of the remains to give them dignity back. And it has been very important for many families who are unable to afford this kind of service before. These families actually rented cemetery niche. So yung mga nicho, they can only rent it for 5 years. That's what they can afford. And when the leases came up, at least they were given the opportunity, the option to have them cremated. Eventually, we're looking at the mass graves where the unclaimed bodies have been taken to. Maybe if we can problematize that eventually, that would be best. If we can set up a memorial or an official recognition of victims, such as the ones they made after 9/11, diba, sa ground zero, that could also help in the healing of the families. But more importantly, aside from healing, is that we never forget. We must realize that forgiveness does not automatically happen just because we have healed. And for a lot of people, this kind of forgiveness can only come if there has been reparations, if there has been prosecution.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from drug war lawyer Kristina Conti. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. If you haven't caught up with the many things we've learned about the drug war from the House hearings, check out my conversation with veteran reporter Inday Espina Verona, covering the testimony of one of the campaign's top implementers. We'll leave a link in the show notes. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. Thanks for listening.